All right. Thank you very much for sitting down to talk with us for this project that we've launched. Peter Wallensteen, University of Uppsala, founder, am I right, of the Conflict and Peace Department, Peace and Conflict Department at the university?
Department of Peace and Conflict Research.
Department of Peace and Conflict
University.
Research. Thank
Yes.
you. And I'm correct, founder, am I right?
Yeah, everything is a definitional matter, but
Okay.
Part of the founding team. Yes.
Part of the founding team, yes, of course, right. We don't want to suggest that you were conspiring by yourself.
No.
But and I was asking you at dinner last night. It was not, in fact, the first in Europe. Prio was the first in Europe, but early on, one of the early centers in Europe. Well, we want to talk to you a little bit about your career and try and document a little bit of that, see what reflections that you care to offer, and tie a little bit to people who are coming into the career, but also just to try to document a history so that we know where we've come from. And so the first thing I want to ask you about is what research of yours are you most proud of? Not necessarily, what your best, but if you sit back and you have to pick one, right? What would that be?
Yeah, let me go back and give you just a history, so you have the timeline.
Yeah, okay.
So the PRIO, the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, comes into being in 1959. And in 1966, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute is founded. So these are two institutes, and they're both outside the universities. They are institutes, and they largely depend on government money, foreign ministry kind of money. So somewhere in the middle of the 60s, there is a seminar formed here in Uppsala, basically with young students, PhD candidates, and some senior professors who are interested in disarmament, nuclear disarmament issues and things like that. And they start a seminar where they focus on sanctions. And I'm interested in sanctions. I'm interested in African affairs, and particularly Rhodesia, South Africa, and so on. I was involved with boycotts and things like that. So they want to do a project on sanctions. And at that time, Galtung, who founded the Journal of Peace Research, the Peace Research Institute, is also interested in sanctions. So he's coming here and gives a presentation about sanctions, which sort of completely turns things upside down. It's an article that came out in World Politics 1967, and he shows why the sanctions are really cumbersome and why they might be backfiring. And that was extremely stimulating, because we had sort of a very simple idea. You put sanctions and things change, but he shows that you put pressure and things might actually be completely counterproductive. So that was intriguing, and for me that was a sort of giving a feeling that, this with research is not a bad idea. You can actually ask odd questions, and you can see that the world is different than you think. And so he invites me to come to the Peace Research Institute in Oslo in the spring of 1967. And for me that becomes a very big thing, because just before that I and my fiancée, my wife Lina that you have met, were part of a student exchange going to Poland. And these Polish students bring us to a small concentration camp that I never heard of outside Lublin, called Majdanek. And there were only, I can't remember now, 300,000 people that were killed, something like that. And they take us to a barn with just the shoes of some 10,000 people.
Wow.
And then you start to see, 20,000 shoes. How many then is 300,000, 600,000, 6 million? How big a calamity is. So it's extremely shocking experience. And right after that we go to the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, and here is this guy saying, with research we can somehow have an impact on the world, and this gives us some hope. So you can see that it for me became a connection to the idea with peace research. So coming back to Uppsala as a student, I am engaged in this seminar, and we start to push it that the university should take over this kind of a seminar, and that becomes then a unit in the university in the social science called already from the beginning the Department of Peace and Conflict Research. And then this is 1971, and then my 1981 we get a chair connected to this called the Dag Hammarskjöld chair, and by 1985 I'm appointed in that one, and from 1986 we can then start the PhD program, which was really the key thing we wanted to do. So in that sense we are building up something which is different from pre-U, CPRE. We are doing something inside the universities.
Right.
And a lot of our peace research friends are saying, no, the university is a hopeless conservative place, and Galtung and others, they don't even have a PhD because they, in principle protest against the university and its hierarchy and so on. Yeah, but
now, I was told by Lena that you didn't want to go through graduation or wouldn't wear. That you had some of these views yourself. That she really had to push you at the ceremony for the Hammarskjöld chair, where you to actually.
You have to have this special what do you call it in English? Tails and coats. With a stiff breast.
And this was not entirely comfortable.
No, it wasn't. But I did do my PhD anyway. But I didn't go to the ceremony. It was regarded, this ceremony is called promotion, and those who don't go are defined as promotion protesters.
So it was a status. Now, when I was here in January, you got a medal at that ceremony. Right? This is the ceremony that I saw, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, this is what Lena was saying. You should have known Peter when he was younger.
Well, I'll tell you where I changed, and that is in 1985 when I'm inaugurated in this Hammarskjöld chair.
Yeah.
We have been fighting for this for 4 years to really get a peace research chair, and we were feeling that this was going to be taken over by political science and others, and the fact that we won was very important. So I said, okay, now I succumb to these academic rituals.
I'll wear the bourgeois.
Yeah. And then, as you have seen this grand hall, we have 3 professors at the same time inaugurated, 2 economists and myself. And we walk into this hall, and then everybody rises, and the music starts to play. And I'm walking down there and say, yeah, maybe this is not a bad idea after all. So that is a proud moment, yes. And after that, I tried to convince everybody here who finished their degree in peace and conflict research to go through this ceremony.
Do you?
Yeah,
oh,
and most
really?
of them do.
You're a convert. Okay.
And the first conversion was really a couple of years later when I was asked to be the promoter of the ceremony. That's sort of leading the ceremony. And I asked, what is in it for me? And they say, well, if you nominate somebody as an honorary doctor, we pay particular attention to the promoter's wish. They didn't say so you do it, but so I said, okay, if I suggest to Galtung, would you do that? And they said, that's fine. So I had the honor of putting a wreath on his head as an honorary doctor of Uppsala University.
When was it?
This was in 1987.
87.
So I was sort of giving back a lot of the inspiration that he gave once upon a time. So I'm proud, coming back to your question, I'm proud of the department and of the PhD program, and it's a great program. In my own research, I guess the conflict data program is the thing I'm most happy about and devote most time to. But in terms of research, maybe this sanctions research that I started in the beginning is really something where I felt I really contributed something as well.
What does I have to apologize, I'm not familiar with it. Did it focus on Rhodesia?
No, it was, I didn't know much about methodology, and nobody in political science could tell me how to do it, so I sort of figured out myself that maybe if you have a number of cases, you can do something more, and so I tried to get all the cases that there were, which by the definitions I had were 10 cases. So I tried to do conclusions from 10 cases, where 2 were successes and 8 were failures. So in a sense that meant that, being favorable to sanctions, this was sort of a defeat for the home team. But I was thinking that, if you are defeated, you better figure out why. So under what conditions could the sanctions really work? And that's what I tried to specify in that work.
All right, great. What led you to undertake the research project for which you feel like you are best known?
Yes, it was a sort of so we had 2 degrees here. So first you took the licentiate, and that's where I wrote about economic sanction. That was really sort of, how should I say it, breaking off economic relations as a tool. But when doing that, I became interested in the fact that what happens when you have relationships, what kind of influences are you doing then? So that's when my big dissertation, so to say, is about the reverse. What are the dependencies and you can say the sort of imperial structure that exists, and what impact do they have? So that's the other dissertation. So it's reversing the whole thing, and from there on follow that I wanted to connect it to conflict, and the only lists of conflict that were available were something done by a guy in Hungary, and then the Singer project in
Correlates of War.
Correlates of War,
Right.
yes. And so I used what was available, but I was not happy with it. So I said we should be able to do this in
What
some
was it
other
like
way.
to get the data? Did you had to get a magnetic tape shipped from Ann Arbor, ICPSR?
That's an interesting question. No, I probably just took it from the. I mean, in those days you had punched
yes,
cards, and they were published in books.
So this is card punching, right? So you punched your own cards off a book. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
And the original one actually, you had actually a little stick that you stuck through the punch cards and then sorted out the various variables.
No, I never saw.
You never
I always
saw
saw the
that
key.
was
No,
high-level
it was-
statistics in the middle of the 60s.
You were poking them out manually.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Right, like voters do in South Florida.
Exactly.
Well,
yes,
it's 2000
No,
anyway.
no chads.
That's right. The machine would spit it out if it was a chat.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow.
So that led me to say, no, we have to do this in a better way, and I was not happy with the way Correlates of War was. So then comes another.
Would you care to elaborate?
Yeah.
Well, shortcomings from your perspective on the Correlates of War.
Yes, it was not covering all the conflicts that were really politically significant. By having the big threshold of 1,000, by basically thinking more of interstate than intrastate, there was too much of conflict material that was not captured there.
Yeah.
And that's why I got to look at the work of Ted Gurr and others, and I felt, no, here is a lot of other stuff. And then what happened was that we hired a person here, and he told me that he was every night listening to BBC World Service. So I told him, well, that's interesting, what do you hear? And he says, yeah, lots of conflicts around in the world. So I said, why don't you just record those? Really? So I constructed a little sheet where he could fill in this, and he would sit there in the middle of the night recording these things and then report to me the following morning. And then I realized, he's old, he's not feeling very well, this is a little hard work. So we bought him our first real big investment for data collection, and that was a tape recorder and a timer. So that went on at midnight to record it, so you could listen in the morning.
Wow, how
And
interesting.
then, so this is what we started in '79.
I had a similar experience that was nowhere near as successful.
Yeah.
Well, it was my first year in graduate school, actually, and you mentioned Gurr.
Yeah.
Most people are going to think the 1970 Why Men Rebel, but I think you're actually referencing the data
Exactly.
sets that he put together, which are,
right.
people know Minorities at Risk so much,
Sure.
but the original, that tradition of data collection has really been lost. The World Handbook of Social Indicators,
Exactly,
all those,
yeah.
and Gurr's. He and Singer both are from NYU, and they overlap just a little bit. And it's kind of just odd that Singer would do the Correlates of War and Gurr would play a foundational role.
Yeah.
Because the Feyerabends were the others that had,
Exactly,
right, and Rummel. So
Yeah,
those
yeah.
three were the original sort of domestic conflict. But so I was there in my first year in graduate school, and I was reading the New York Times every day, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was throwing away data, literally.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I started clipping,
Fascinating.
right, and I'm
Yeah.
putting them in a, just a manila folder, and of course I would learn that I was never going to sit down and find the time to actually do anything with them.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
similar idea, but
absolutely.
you had
Parallel,
the wherewithal to make something.
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. No, we got a visit here from David Singer in maybe August '79, and I told him about this, and then he invited me to come to Michigan as a visiting scholar.
And what were you doing so it was being taped,
Yeah.
and then the next day,
Yeah, we would record it on sheets, which was called radio data. So what's the source, what is the conflict,
Yeah.
and so on. So we could compile these long lists, and we became increasingly aware, what kind of new definitions do you need to get the right thing, because the Singer definition, for instance, does not say who are the real actors
Yeah,
or
that's
what
right.
are they disagreeing about. They
Right,
could be actually
right.
there could be war groups, criminal groups, all kinds of things, rather than state actors that would actually fit the criteria.
Yeah.
But they never do that.
So what happened? Did these didn't get digitized?
No,
You didn't do punch cards.
Not really. What happened? The next step, encouraged then by Singer, and having lots of discussion with him in Michigan, trying to formulate, how one should do this. I wanted him to reform his project because I assumed he's a guy which a lot of money.
Why doesn't
and
that work well? It's always hard.
So-
I've got this brilliant idea about how
yeah.
you can fix what you're doing.
So
I don't
what
sell that well either.
No. So what the whole thing ends up with is a discussion with him where he in the end says, okay, if you don't like what I'm doing, do your own thing. So I said, okay.
David's never had trouble being direct, right?
No,
it's one of the
but it was a
wonderful
good
things.
advice.
No, I like it. I value
I
that
have been
highly
using
about
it myself
David.
later
Yes,
on. So then we do get a small grant to do something with this. But again, I mean, now we are in the early 80s. And
Okay.
collecting data is just a completely different thing from today. So we discovered,
is,
for instance, that just like you mentioned about New York Times, we discovered that the Times magazine, the Times newspaper from London is available here, but we can't subscribe to it. But we noticed that the library here is throwing them away when they are 2 days old. So instead of having them throwing them away, we take them and then we sit there and click
Really? Wow, okay.
and collect them in actually your way. And those things we still have, and they
clippings?
yes, so we are digitalizing now.
Are you really?
Yeah. So you can scan
Right.
them and look
Oh,
at them.
wow,
Well,
okay.
that's a major project. We'll
Yeah,
see how far we
yeah,
get.
right.
But that's quite a lot. And then, of course, things starts to open up when things are more computerized and so on. And, of course, the way you collect information today is completely different from
When
those days.
can you just tell us a little bit about how the project? When was the moment where you suddenly realized we've got this institutionalized? We have some financial, so you're not just on the shoestring, because you start out you're on a shoestring,
Oh,
right?
definitely, yes,
And
yeah.
and you're not on a shoestring anymore. I
no,
mean,
no.
it's not like you've got unlimited
Yeah.
source of into the future, but
Yeah.
but you're definitely not on the shoestring anymore. What was that? How did that occur? What was that like?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that the CPRI, the Peace Research Institute, becomes interested into doing something.
I never knew this. Okay.
Yeah, and so they would give us a small sum of money to do some collection and publish things in the yearbook, and that
Yeah.
we still continue.
Okay.
But they were not interested in the smaller conflicts. They wanted major things. They are always sort of into major things, major weapons, major conflicts. So never interested in small arms and things like that. But they are really the thing
okay.
that create a lot of the trouble. Then Journal of Peace Research came in, and Nils Petter Gleditsch was here. And then we refined the definitions of what kind of smaller conflicts would we have. So then we had the arrangement, smaller conflicts, or rather like this, all conflicts that meet the definition will be published in Journal of Peace Research. Bigger ones will be published in
That's right.
CPRI.
I remember that. Okay.
And that starts to get some traction, and people start to be interested. And then we can use that as a basis for grants,
Right.
grant proposals. And so you can say the real breakthrough is about around 2002, I would say.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. That's
Right.
when we do get some good funding from SIDA, the Swedish Development.
That would have been later than I would have guessed.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And that's when we can start to build up the database and start really hiring people who are
Was that-
full-time working on this.
Was chasing money to keep that project alive, was that a big part of your, the work that you were doing at that time? For
and it still is.
15
yeah.
years?
Yeah, it still is. Yeah, it still
Okay.
is a big thing to keep this rolling in. I mean, in the beginning, I would know a lot about all these conflicts.
Yeah.
Today, I really don't, because I become really the man who tries to raise the money, hire
Right.
the people, and when we got reductions in funding, I'm the one who fire people too. So,
Yeah.
so that's sort of the thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the project now has a very secure funding by the university, at least funding which amounts to about 5 people full time. So that provides us with a strong basis.
Absolutely.
And I think this is the way it should be. It is a university thing to do this kind
I
of.
just need to curb the ambition of the project.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So,
So-
I'd like to shift gears and ask you to now think about the field over the course of your career. And what I'm interested in is, can you think about what areas, questions, topics, puzzles do you feel should have received more attention than has happened? Where have we, missed? And then there's a part 2. Where do you think the labor, the person hours, as it were, have been over-invested? Where, so kind of think about, if you could go back and get us collectively, and it's a pipe dream, but collectively to shift our energies to this area or these areas rather than that one, what would that be for you?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, from the beginning we looked here very much at conflict and causes of conflict. And I think that still remains a very big agenda, but the dynamics of conflicts, how they change, all the kind of interactions that takes place, all that I think we still don't really know much about, and how they, and at the same time, and of course ideally then we'll also think about conflict resolution, how do these conflicts end? And if we think about these as 3 phases, it sounds logical, but the reality I think is much more complicated. There are solution attempts or very
there aren't
early
these discrete breakpoints, are there? Right?
No.
Right.
So how all these things is convoluted and happening at the same time, and then suddenly something leads to an agreement or leads to a victory or something like that. But this is much more convoluted and complicated than I think we really do. And I'm sometimes wondering, what kind of data challenge that really entails to get into these kind of dynamics. So I think here is really, this is more complicated than we thought. And you can even put it a little like this, that for instance, the Correlates War project shows that we have maybe 10 times as many militarized disputes as wars. So there is some kind of selection, there is some conflicts that are for some reason so complicated, so they become wars.
Yeah.
But I don't think we still really know exactly
Understand
why.
that. Yeah.
And the same when we look at civil wars and so on. And that also, of course, means that the way they end is probably even more complicated and many more types of outcomes than we normally think about. And so I think we are still facing the basic issue here. I mean, the causes and solution to the war problematic we still don't have. And I think we need to put more investment into that. But my emphasis would be these dynamics, these complications that take place.
Right, the interactions.
Yeah.
Would you argue that we are more weak on the data side? Are we more weak on the theory side? Is it just a mistake to try to separate the two and think about it that way? What?
Yeah, I would probably think that there are also these interactions, so to say, the data and the theory things. I think they need to stand in a closer relationship to each other, and we can't just theorize.
But that's a challenge one can direct at a Correlates of War or a UCDP project, right? I mean, taken to its extreme, this suggests that any of us who theorize need to generate our own data. At the extreme. I mean,
that's right. And of course, one of the ideas with the conflict data program actually been that the people who collect the data are really professionally collecting the data. They follow the definition, and so they don't necessarily have a hunch about how they're going to use it or how it will be used. So in that sense, the information they collect should be as unbiased as possible, so to say. So in that sense, you can separate data collection from the actual analysis.
And theory construction and testing.
But of course, the analysis as such will maybe result in saying here is a need for another type of data and we need to collect that. Okay, then you put it over again to the professional data collectors who do this
Well, one of my hobby horses, and it sounded like you were saying something similar, but I might have just been reading it in, with the Correlates of War project in particular, is that the way it was conceptualized, and right, and all we're doing is measuring concepts, right? And so the concepts that Singer came up with to measure, as interesting and valuable as they were, they also, by attracting as much attention as they did, as you suggest, I think you're saying the same sort of thing that I argue, which is we're constrained from studying interactions. You can't do it. Right? I mean, and so there's a risk that if data are collected, that we the community are drawn to study, construct studies that can be done using those data, which lead us to not ask. Is that?
No, I would agree with that. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. But also at the same time, I mean, we have to think about things as sort of doing preliminary things.
Sure.
We're
Absolutely.
doing what we can do today, and,
Right.
and these are the constraints.
What
And
is
we
the-
should be aware of these constraints.
What time horizon what's the right time horizon to think about accumulation and progress in our field? Is a decade the right? Should we really think in, is it 40 years? Is it every year? If you were going to be very serious about trying to say, I'm going to see accumulation, what's this, we call ourselves political science, or as you've got the research, right, at the university for peace and conflict for the department, right? If we're going to, so the goal is accumulation of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
What would you say is the right metric, time-wise? How should we think about that?
Yeah, it is of course a function of the amount of resources that you can put in, and it seemed to me that we are getting more resources. There's more understanding. This is more positive than it was back in the 80s, for instance. But even so, when we think back, what are the big breakthroughs, very interesting findings that have really had a strong impact, and say that democratic peace is one of those that have had a strong impact. How long time did it take to really produce what you needed to show that? And it's probably 15, 20 years, something like that, collecting the data, trying various things, and then Sevmos and others start to come up with this notion at the end of the 80s, and then in the 90s it becomes sort of refined and so on and so forth.
Right.
So we are really thinking just to develop one concept which can have a central position in the discussion. It probably takes 15 to 20 years. So if we really want to do the thing that I'm talking about, understanding these dynamics and understand how we come to peace, we are talking about something of the same nature. I mean, 15 to 20 years, but maybe it will require much more resources. It's not just a couple of researchers. There has to be much more coordinated.
It's a collective
effort.
enterprise.
Yeah. And as we don't, the community is not organized in a way to do that. It becomes dependent a little on people showing in some interesting research that this seems to be a valid way to go, and others then hang on, and so then you get the right dynamics. So, and I think that's the way research should be, because we shouldn't really administratively put all eggs in one basket. Right. And if you look at our colleagues in medicine or natural sciences, and so that's the way it does work. And
right.
It's an interesting dynamics, but it's unpredictable.
As someone who's concerned about the state, I'm uncomfortable with state-directed research, especially in our...
No, we don't want that.
In our
and that's why, for instance, a thing like the UCDP, the conflict data program, can, I think, only be done at university. I mean, if this was a Department of Political Affairs in the UN, or if it was the Defense Department, it would all, lose credibility very quickly to be seen as sort of a political thing.
So let me shift gears again and ask, if you, think back to when you were mid-career, and if you had a thought to do an interview like we're doing here today, who would you have wanted to interview?
Okay, so that means we'll bring us back to about 1980 or 85, something like that. I was appointed 85, so I was 40 years old then. So who would I mean, I already know Galtung, Singer. Who else? It would probably have been some of these older founding guys.
Yeah.
They are always fascinating. So Quincy Wright would have been interesting to talk to.
Yeah.
Or Sorokin would have been interesting to
Uh-huh.
talk to. I mean, not only because of his personal life, but because of what got him to write this kind of work. That would have been.
It was incredibly innovative.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. That would have been interesting. Are there others? I'm sure. I mean, of course, have a chance to talk to Albert Einstein would have been absolutely fascinating, because he was basically a pacifist and concerned about these things, but he still writes this letter to President Roosevelt about the need to have a nuclear weapon. Now, he wasn't happy about that, but he felt that this was the way to somehow prevent the Nazi Germans from. Would have been fascinating to talk to him.
About that,
definitely, yes. I talked to Joseph Rotblat, who was the one who actually created the Pugwash movement, but that is based on the first manifesto, which is the Einstein-Bertrand Russell manifesto, which is an appeal to scientists about the need to do some new thinking. So from Rotblat, I know little how Einstein and the others may have been thinking, but it would have been fascinating to have a chance. So I don't know if your question allows for that. You have the resources. Can you take a time trip?
Yeah, no, we're working on that problem, but
that's good.
very little progress so far.
Oh, okay. So another 15, 20
But I'll let
years,
you know
yes.
when. I'll be sure to share it with
Yeah.
you first. One last question, which is, if you think a little bit about your experience earning tenure in the university, getting established in the university, and you reflect on people who are having that experience now, and you may want to distinguish between the Swedish or European system and the United States, but what sort of advice would you offer to folks at that stage of their career that you think might not be obvious to someone with less experience?
You mean advice in terms of their professional
Development?
Yeah.
How do you, what can you think of anything that you would want to offer that be sure to pay attention to this, or do that, and maybe it might be personal, it might be professional, some mix of the two.
Yeah, right. And the first advice is do not do as I did. I mean, I was head of department from the very beginning until 1999, so that was 27 years. So don't do that. but do serve, because it is important to serve and know how the university functions. You need to understand the university as a system, and by being head of department for a period, a short period.
Similar to the Mandela stay in Robben Island, right?
Exactly, yes.
We don't want to overdo that analogy.
No, we shouldn't, but definitely it gives you an understanding of what kind of system you're operating in.
Yeah.
Because if you don't understand what system you're operating in, you can be extremely frustrated and so on, but you need to know the university you're in and find out, to create networks and so on and so forth. And that will make your life better, but you will also realize how slow a system it is, and how difficult it is to get the right decision in place. The advantage is that once they are in place, it's very hard for somebody to change them. so
yes,
that's the kind of experience.
Yes, this is the wisdom of.
Another thing would probably be this, that we are part of a collective effort in some sense. It's not just ourselves, and we constantly are dependent on having colleagues that are supportive or other kind of support is, but
Public
also
support
students. Public support is very important.
For universities, it's very important.
It is. So one needs to have a network which is a little wider, and not just think that you yourself can do things. You need to have a network of strong colleagues. I think it is important also to have media connections and so on, because we need to be able to explain what we are doing in some reasonable way. And as we are actually going to come up with results which are counterintuitive, run against the conventional wisdom and so on and so forth, we need to be able to also be able to explain this and do it in a sort of offensive way, not just defending what we are doing. We're saying, no, this is the way research is going. This is what the trend now in research, and that is the thing that brings us forward. And you media people, you should realize that this is what we are doing.
Yes.
So we are not in a defensive situation. On the contrary, we are creating new things. We are at the frontier where new things do develop, and that's what we should be able to present. But we need our colleagues. We need our standing in the academic community to be able to have that voice in the media and in the public as well.
So the Swedish scholar tells the American that we should be collective, not individual.
That's right. Yes. I mean, even a multimillionaire in the United States is not a self-made person. It really depends on a whole set.
I think we need to put you on a speaking tour. I don't know that that's a very
sure,
well appreciated
sure.
point.
Yeah,
Well, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with us. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank
All
you.
right, absolutely.
Good.